had a relationship of almost 6 years with my boyfriend Andres. Almost 2 years ago, he started looking for a job out of town, but I refused to let distance separate us. At first, one of us would travel so we could be together every weekend, but then the trips became less frequent due to the expense and the need to save for our wedding. Over time, I began to notice changes in his routine. He wasn't answering the phone and communication was becoming more difficult. Our conversations were no longer as pleasant or enjoyable as they used to be. Although I was always interested in him, I began to feel that he was not as interested in me as he used to be. His lack of interest was evident, and it seemed that he no longer cared to call me or hear from me. For a while, I felt very sad. To stave off the boredom, I started going out with friends. On one such outing, I met a man at a gathering where alcohol, laughter, and loud music reigned. I decided to try something different. This man was completely nice, with a cute face and passionate eyes. He enjoyed having fun as much as I did, which made me feel alive again, since my longtime boyfriend Andres rarely enjoyed a night of dancing. He was a cold and distant person, but deep down, I knew his attitude was only towards me, and I suspected it was different with other people. However, after so many years, I had adapted to his personality. David, my new friend, awakened my passion. Although I warned him that I had a boyfriend, he seemed glad that I was engaged, as he liked forbidden relationships and it added a touch of adrenaline to his life. Meanwhile, I felt guilty and kept thinking about my boyfriend, because even though things weren't the same, I always considered him the love of my life and really loved him madly. But I think it was the loneliness and the fact that my boyfriend didn't know how to prioritize that led us down another path. At first, I thought he cared more about money than he did about me, and I also had a suspicion that he had someone else occupying his time. Even though we were getting married in a few months, something wasn't working right. The months went by and my time spent with David increased. He made me feel complete. Our first date was perfect. We went to the movies to watch a horror film. Trembling with fear, I closed my eyes so I wouldn't see the scariest parts, and David took my fear away with a sweet kiss and holding my hand throughout the movie. We held hands and the warm kisses dispelled any fear. Even though we knew it was wrong for us, we decided to stay together until the end. After the movie, he invited me to his apartment for dinner. It took him only a few minutes to prepare a special dinner accompanied by an exquisite wine. During dinner, he confessed to me his true intentions for the evening, how much he loved being with me, and how happy I made him with my company. After several glasses of wine, passion and desire ignited between the two of us. We indulged in an adventure of no return. I was wearing a somewhat short black skirt and a light, low-cut blouse that allowed a glimpse of my soft, smooth skin on my back, along with my favorite chain and perfect makeup, always with my hair down. He was dressed seductively, in a black jumpsuit that highlighted his attractiveness. His perfume was delicious and awakened all my senses of pleasure. We began to kiss slowly, his hands wrapped around my waist, and we indulged in caresses full of excitement and sweetness. David made everything special. His kisses became my biggest addiction and made clear the immense desire we shared. We ended up making love and promised each other the moon, the sun, and the earth. Although I was being unfaithful to Andrew, whom I couldn't get out of my mind, I fell in love with David. We would meet in places like the car or a public restroom, and 2 motels became our perfect places for secret trysts. Soon after, I discovered that Andrew had dated a coworker during his time out of town, but their relationship hadn't worked out, and so he had decided to return. One day, I checked his cell phone and realized everything that had happened. All the answers were there. However, I felt guilty because I had failed him too. But because I really loved him, I decided to keep quiet and move on, not realizing that our relationship was in ruins and that we would continue to fail. Although I decided to look for David again to cover my sorrows, he would not be available to me, as I had made the decision to push him away and he was not willing to return. I felt increasingly lonely, strange, and empty. This made me come to my senses and realize that this was not healthy for either of us. Someone had to make the decision to jump ship and take on self-love, and that person was me. From that moment of loneliness, I learned that extramarital relationships lead nowhere, and that if something does not work, it is not advisable to stay in that place, but to look for what can really make me happy without hurting others.
Hello everyone. Today I want to share with you a personal story that has changed my life completely. I have made a very important decision in my life, to get divorced. I haven't seen my wife in 5 days and I refuse to see her or talk to her. Everyone seems to be crowding around me, forcing me to confront her. They are driving me crazy with constant texts and calls. I don't know what to say to these people to get them to leave me alone. The truth is, these people are my friends and family, people I want to stay in touch with after my divorce is over. Let me give you a little context. My wife and I started dating when we were in our 20s and married when she became pregnant with our first child. Our marriage was great. We had 2 other children, excellent intimacy, good communication, and we were doing well financially. We already owned our home and even had a cat. The kids were well balanced and everything seemed to be going well. We were happy, or so I thought, until about 4 months ago. One day, my wife came home from work talking about a new manager named Frank. I immediately felt uncomfortable, as if something was wrong. However, I smiled and asked her about him, if he was married, if he had children, where he lived, vague things. She told me that he had married a second time and had 4 children in all. At first, I thought maybe it was just a platonic love and she would grow out of it soon. I decided to wait, believing that this would not last long. But to my surprise, this situation repeated itself day after day and I felt more and more uneasy. I decided I had to do something about it. I told my wife that there was a virus alert on our internet network and that we needed to update the software on all our devices. Taking advantage of her lack of skills in that area, I took her computer and installed remote monitoring software to log keystrokes. It was the only way I could find out the truth. A few days later, I saw the first few text messages and they were fairly innocent, mostly work-related. However, over time, the frequency of the messages increased and they became increasingly personal. At that point, I confronted my wife gently, but she lied to my face. This continued for 2 months, repeatedly confronting her without any proof. She kept lying over and over again. I decided to prepare myself emotionally for the worst. During that time, the message exchanges between my wife and Frank became increasingly intense and emotional. I confronted my wife on several occasions, without any proof, but she continued to lie. I accepted that I was leaving my marriage and, in parallel with her activities, I began to exercise and prepare myself for the reality that divorce was the only likely outcome at that time. I hired an attorney, prepared divorce papers and even hired someone to investigate my wife's activities and gather solid evidence of her infidelity. I hired a private detective to track her movements and provide me with irrefutable evidence. It was an emotionally draining time for me. As I waited for the evidence, I was on a roller coaster of emotions, grief, anger, sadness, and confusion. I could not understand how our relationship had come to this point. I had put so much effort and love into our marriage, and suddenly it was all falling apart. Finally, the private detective handed me the evidence. Photographs, phone records, compromising text messages, everything pointed to an intimate relationship between my wife and Frank. There was no room for doubt. It was clear that she had been unfaithful to me for months. It was a devastating blow to me. I felt a mixture of sadness, anger, and betrayal. It took me time to process all the information and accept the reality of the situation. I knew there was no turning back, that our marriage had come to an end. I filed the divorce papers and handed them to my wife. Although I expected some resistance from her, she surprisingly agreed to go ahead with the divorce. I guess she knew there was no way she could deny the overwhelming evidence against her. Since then, I have been avoiding any contact with my wife. I need time and space to heal and rebuild my life. My friends and family have been constantly trying to intervene, encouraging me to confront her and resolve things in a civilized manner. But right now, I can't do that. I need to put my emotional well-being first and deal with the pain this situation has caused. Divorce is not easy, and I know there is a long road ahead. However, I am determined to get through this experience and rebuild my life. I will focus on myself, on taking care of my children, and on surrounding myself with people who will support me in this healing process. Through this personal story, I hope to convey the importance of taking care of our emotional health and dealing with difficult situations in the way that best suits our needs. We all go through challenges in life, and how we face and recover from them defines our strength and resilience. Thank you for listening to my story and for being here.
I am 35 years old and my wife is 34. We were childhood sweethearts and did everything together. She was the love of my life. I proposed to her when I was 20 because I thought it was the right time, and so did she. When I was 26 and she was 25, we had our daughter and we were very happy. She was the only thing missing in our life and we were such a happy family. Then, a few months after the birth of our first daughter, she gave birth to our son. Again, we were so happy. We now had our little family of 4. Before anyone asks why we had children so young, after high school I got my degree in accounting and then went to work for my dad's company, which is big. I was able to make a lot of money and, yes, when we got married we agreed to sign a prenuptial agreement. We dated very often and our bedroom life was amazing. I showered her and our children with gifts and flowers. 3 times a week we had a big house. I was able to give her the life of her dreams, which we always talked about so much when we were teenagers. I thought we were happy, but still, she cheated on me. I found out she had a dating app when I confronted her about it. She didn't deny it and said I was always absent and she had no way to be satisfied. I wanted to leave, but I didn't because of my children, even though my pain was too much to even look at her. We went to counseling and did well for a while, but one day, maybe 2 months later, she said she was making out with boys every night. She even had some boys in the house and in our bed, in the house I paid for. My children were now 8 and 7 years old. We knew the divorce would be difficult for them, as they loved us both so much. I didn't want them to have a tainted image of her, despite my grief and pain, so I stayed, but moved her to the guest room. You're probably wondering where her sister comes in. Well, throughout all of this, she was my rock. My family would not have understood my pain. My wife's family always favored her because her sister was the baby they had by mistake. I still loved her, but I didn't know what made her sister's life hell. My wife was barely home when she moved into the guest room. Now our children barely saw their mother. Whenever they spoke to her, she was rude, cold, or ignored them. When she came home, she would look for something to eat, drink, go to her room and stay there. So my wife's sister was there for our children. She would be in the house a lot. She picked up my kids and did things with them. She was also at home when my work prevented me from being there. My wife and I agreed that it would be best for our children for her to stay in the guest room and for me to take primary responsibility for raising them. My wife's sister, whom we will call Laura, became a mother figure to my children. She was always there, taking care of them, playing with them and giving them the love and attention that their mother could not offer at the time. Laura genuinely cared about their well-being and provided them with a stable and loving environment. As time went on, my relationship with Laura began to strengthen. We shared many things in common and developed a deep connection. She was my confidant and provided me with the emotional support I so desperately needed during this difficult time. Although at first I felt guilty for having these feelings for my wife's sister, over time I realized it was mutual. One day, Laura and I had an honest conversation about our feelings. We both admitted that we had fallen in love with each other. It was an overwhelming moment, full of mixed emotions. We knew that our situation was complicated and that we would have to make difficult decisions. We decided to be honest with my wife about our feelings. Even though we knew this could cause her pain, we believed it was the right thing to do. We had a very difficult conversation with her, explaining how our feelings had evolved and that we wanted to explore a relationship together. My wife, although initially shocked and hurt, showed some understanding. She also recognized that our relationship had frayed and that our lives had gone our separate ways. We agreed that it would be best for all of us to move forward with the divorce amicably and allow ourselves to find happiness in new ways. Laura and I have been together ever since. We have built a strong and stable relationship based on trust and mutual love. We continue to provide support for my children, who have accepted and understood the situation in a surprisingly mature way. While I understand that our story may seem controversial or unconventional, I want to emphasize that our decisions were made with the welfare of our children and the pursuit of personal happiness in mind. Sometimes, life takes us down unexpected paths and we must make difficult decisions. The most important thing is to act with integrity and care for those around us.
Thank you for listening to our stories. If you liked it, give it a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing and debating together with more stories.